this afternoon. We are going to look at the Second Amendment as elder parliament donations this morning. But I'm going to bring it, in another way. And just for a little bit of background, we were looking at libertarianism during our midweek studies. And this is how the subject of gun rights came into play. Actually, I didn't have the understanding, or I didn't know. Whether or not we should carry or not carry guns. So when it came into our midweek studies, I was surprised. And so my first reaction was to talk to Elder Parmenter. But I quickly realized that the issue is more complex than it looks like. And that we needed to study it a little bit deeper. At least I needed to study it a little bit deeper. So this is what we are going to look this afternoon. So let's start with a silent prayer. Amen. So with the introduction of the Midnight Cry, we've seen that the movement moved from the right to the left. Okay. And there was 4 studies that helped us make that shift. There was the 2 stream of information, the battle of Ipsos, the moral majority, and the line of the Nathanims. And these 4 studies highlighted the values of the conservative Christians' right, particularly on societal issues such as equal right or gender equality. Equal rights. So this was significant because the movement was in the right wing, political spectrum before. Because of our heritage, SDA heritage. We were looking at Protestantism, evangelicalism, Catholicism. And their values and ideology were on the right wing, or are still. But we also came to understand that the right wing political spectrum goes beyond apostate Protestantism. And there are other actors to take into account, like libertarianism or the far-right Trinity. Libertarianism, far-right Trinity. Mm-hmm. And although there are divergences between them, they share an underlying ethos that is driving the right wing, and that is freedom. So this concept of freedom was brought to our attention when Elder Test started her Vesper studies. That is not to say that she has not tried to warn the movement about the misuse of the word freedom with that of equality. She did, but with the Vespers, she brings that political element that we have not yet fully grasped. And so the Vespers, they help us connect the dots that we were missing to understand the polarization between two cultures, freedom and equality. Now, historically, the notion of freedom in the United States can be traced from the beginning of the New World, but particularly since 1763. So we have colonies that are under Great Britain. And Great Britain is acting as a big government. And one thing that they want to do is to tax the colonies to increase their revenues and expand that control. So they tax heavily on tea, sugar, and stamps. This is what is here. But the American colonists turned against the big government. And they fought for their liberty. But not only because of the tax imposed on the colonies, you are aware, for example, of the Boston Tea Party revolt. But also that the colonists, they were misrepresented at the House of Commons. Chambre commune, and had no possibility to expand the territory over the proclamation line. So this brought them to fight the American Revolution in between 1775 and 1783. And this revolution resulted in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And also the writing of the Constitution in 1787. So the goal was to fight against a big government that was taking away their freedom and put in place a small government instead. And the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution provided them with that freedom, which included to be free and independent states. Mm-hmm. And they also gave them the right of liberty and pursuit of happiness. So now this freedom has been tested in America. We know what happened with slavery that resulted in the Civil War, for example. Or we have the Jim Crow era and the Black codes that were imposed on the now free Blacks. And we also have the Ku Klux Klan. Okay. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Mm-hmm. So now we move a little bit forward. And, all right, I hope you can see correctly, hopefully. Okay, so we have now a financial crisis coming into America in 1929. And that will be a turning point as it shows the limitation of a small government. So when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, is elected, he put in place a big government. And one of the functions of that big government was to intervene in the market economy, finances, but also to overcome the mistreatment of excluded and marginalized people, such as people of color, women, elders, disabled, refugees. Then after we move a little bit forward, because the New Deal would be an instigator for the civil rights movement. Which will be followed by the women's rights movement. And also the LGBTQ movement. I just put Stonewall here. Mm-hmm. So what we see from the time that FDR is elected, we see two sides. We see Republican with Hoover advocating for freedom, and freedom and small government. Sorry. And on the other side, we have the Democrats advocating for more equality and big government. And we know how this battle is very important to understand. Because these issues of freedom or equality, they are also integrated in the cultural war. And not only that, but they are part of the societal issues that we see today. And we know that this is significant because this is what helps us to understand the text as the Sunday law. So now that we have established the context in which the ethos of freedom came to play, we need to also understand the context in which the Constitution was written, and particularly the Second Amendment. So we need to go back to history again. So now that the colonies won the American Revolution, we are here. And that the Declaration of Independence has been promulgated. They need to create a government with enough power to act as a national level of the government between the three branches that we are all know. Executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Now, before those, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, there were Articles of Confederation in place. However, the Congress of the Confederation had limited power to conduct diplomacy and make war. One of these issues is that it could not raise enough funds for itself, and it was entirely dependent of the states for the money. So therefore, they decided to come together and to come together to attend a convention. And this convention was placed in Philadelphia to change those articles. Each state brought some delegates. And on September 17th, 1887, there is a new document that is signed. And that document is what we call the Constitution, or what is called the Constitution. So the Constitution was written in 1787. And it has been ratified in 1788. And it was put in operation in 1789. Now, in that constitution, there are articles that have been added. And some of those articles were part of the Bill of Rights. And the Second Amendment was part of it. Now, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is quote number 1. If you So this sentence can be a bit confusing. And that's the reason why there has been so many interpretations for centuries now. But when the framers, they wrote the Constitution, they relied on other political theories to build the ideal republic. And although they wanted to break through with England, they relied on the English law to write the law of the US, of the United States. And in English law, I'm going to read from the quote number 3. The origins of the Second Amendment can be traced to the late 16th century when Queen Elizabeth I instituted a national militia in which individuals of all classes were required by law to bear arms to defend the crown. So in the sentence, to keep and bear arms was included as a mean to accomplish an objective of a well-regulated militia. So what they needed to do is to check federal tyranny, check correctly, and to bring constitutional balance by distributing the power of the weapons equally among people. Balance. And this balance was to spread the weapons equally among people. Yeah. To express it properly, I'm just going to read it from the quote number 4. The part in bold. It says the right to keep and bear arms was thus included as a means to accomplish the objective of a well-regulated militia to provide for the defense of the nation and to provide a well-trained and disciplined force to check federal tyranny, bring constitutional balance by distributing the power of the sword equally among the people, the states, and the federal government. Um, just looking at okay, so the framers of the Constitution were influenced by the system in place by the Crown. Mm-hmm. And also other political theorists. Mm-hmm. And one of them is Machiavelli or Nicolas Machiavelli. Mm-hmm. And he was a diplomat, an author, a philosopher in the 1400s. And what he says the following, that's quote number 5. Soldiering should be the responsibility of every citizen, but the profession of none. So in other words, it is the rights and responsibilities of citizens to take part in the military service, but there should never be any soldier who made war its only occupation. There was another political theorist. His name is Lawrence Kress. And it's an author that published a book in the 1800s, in the early 1800s. And where he studies and discusses the role of the military in the early political life. Politique. So it says, and that's the quote number 7, he kind of summarized Machiavelli's position. He said, citizens bore arms in defense of the state, motivated by a commitment to common good and officered by the nation's most respected individuals. So it is in this context that the framers wrote the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment that says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. The purpose of the amendment was also to protect against domestic insurrections. Because 4 years before the Bill of Rights, there was an armed insurrection there was an armed insurrection in Massachusetts that was led by a name named Daniel Shea. Daniel Shea. You can see. Yeah. And that insurrection was stopped by the federal government. But many recognized the need of a stronger central government at the Constitution Convention in order to protect against insurrections. And thus, Kress concludes, the author, Kress, it concludes that the Second Amendment, I'm reading from the quote number 9, it says that the Second Amendment assured the people through the agency of a well-regulated militia a role in the preservation of both the external and the internal security of the Republic. Just gonna write down security, internal and external. Okay, so according to the same author, according to Kress, guns were understood by Republican political theorists of the time that guns have a place in society, but only in the service of the common good. And that access to arms was understood for a communal rather than an individual right. But the idea of citizenship to be connected to militia, to the militia and insurrection, the idea, sorry, I'm going to take it back. So the idea of citizenship to be connected to a militia service has been challenged. In part because many believe that the Second Amendment to mean that the people have the right to bear arms primarily for self-defense. And this idea has been legitimized, if I can use that word, by the Supreme Court interpretation of the Second Amendment. So I just want us to have a closer look to those Supreme Court decisions. So before 2008, yeah, the Supreme Court hadn't heard a case regarding the Second Amendment since 1939. And And this was the case called US versus Miller. You have Jack Miller and Frank Layton, who have violated the National Firearm Act of 1934. Because they transported a I'm going to try to say it, a sawed-off double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun. You can just say shotgun. In interstate commerce. So this was the first gun control law in the US, the National Firearm Act. And Jack Miller and Frank Layton, well, they appealed saying that the law violated the Second Amendment right to bear arms. But the Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment does not guarantee an individual to the right to keep and bear arms, especially the shotgun. And the Supreme Court Justice James Clark Reynolds at that time said that carrying a 12 gauge shotgun does not have a reasonable relationship with the preservation and the efficiency of a well-regulated militia. And therefore, the Second Amendment does not guarantee the right to keep such an instrument. And even the NRA at that time was actually in favor of some regulation. So the NRA is the National Rifle Association. And their president in 1934 was Carl Frederick. And it says, and I'm going to read from the quote number 11. It says, I have never believed in the general practice of carrying weapons. I seldom carry one. I do not believe in the general promiscuous toting of guns. I think it should be sharply restricted and only under licenses. And then, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. And then for the next 70 years, we have a major shift in the US culture. And one of them is the growth of the NRA. I'm just going to move on a little bit. We arrive in 1968, and we can here pinpoint the first major shift after the passage of the Gun Control Act of 1968. Here we see a growing faction of the NRA gun rights activists. A growing faction of the NRA gun rights activists. That they begin to shift the focus on the group onto politics. Well, before it always, it had remained largely non-partisan. And then the shift began even more evident when the NRA founded what they called their lobbying arm, the Institution for Legislative Action. And they created its own political action committee in the time for the, political action committee. Yeah, right in the time of the 1976 political elections. And it is marked as a turning point. And I'm just going to read a little bit from quote number, which one? Maybe 14. Okay, so it becomes a turning point when Horton Carter was elected as an executive vice president in 1977. And he shifted the focus of the NRA sports activity to promoting less restrictive guns law and less compromising on guns rights issue. And since then, the NRA has systematically lobbied to break down federal gun control laws. So we are in 1977. And by the time we arrive in 2008, and that the Supreme Court heard its next Second Amendment court case, we see that the conversation in society around guns are completely shifted. So in district, the court case is called District of Columbia versus Miller. And it was a 5-4 ruling. And you have the Supreme Court Justice Anthony Scalia, that he recognized an individual right to possess firearm independently of the service of a state militia. And he also recognized the use of firearms in self-defense within the home. So the court argued that the first clause of the amendment in connection with the militia, which they call a prefatory clause, that that clause should not restrict the operative clause of the amendment. So in other words, the operative clause of the amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the court said that the operative clause should be read to guarantee an individual right to keep and bear arms for self-defense. So we have other justices that wrote a dissent. And some of them are John Paul Stevens, we have David Salter, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Stephen Breyer. And in John Paul Stevens' dissent, he argues that the Second Amendment does not create an unlimited right to possess gun to self-defense purposes. Instead, the most natural reading of the amendment is that it protects the right to keep and bear arms for certain military purposes. So he argues that the amendment states that, no, he argues that the purpose of the amendment is in relation to the state militia and does not address the right to use firearms for self-defense. Particularly because self-defense is not mentioned in the Second Amendment. So we move on now into 2010. And there's another Supreme Court case that is called McDonald versus City of Chicago. In that ruling, the Supreme Court held that the right of an individual to bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment. And it applies to state governments and the federal government. Because the right to self-defense is fundamental to the nation's scheme of ordered liberty. And it is deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. Then we move on again, then we have another court case in 2022. And it's the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. versus Bruin, B. Yeah, oh, yeah, thank you. And then most recently, so this is more recent, and it was a 3-6-3 decision. I think Elder Parmenter spoke about it this morning. And the Supreme Court ruled that the New York's law was unconstitutional, and that the ability to carry a pistol in public was a constitutional right guaranteed by the Second Amendment. It was too long. Okay, let me do it. Mm-hmm. So in other words, from their interpretation of the Second Amendment, now an individual not only has the right to carry a firearm inside the home, but now they also have the right to carry a firearm outside the home for the purpose of self-defense. And that is because it is deeply rooted in American history. Again, this decision was dissented. Mm-hmm. And if we read from our quote number 21, just the part in bold, this is Stephen Breyer's dissent. And he concluded that when courts interpret the Second Amendment, it is constitutionally proper, indeed often necessary, for them to consider the serious danger and consequences of gun violence that lead states to regulate firearms. So, and since 2008, there's been about 80 court cases about the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. And we see how the understanding has shifted. Before, it was for the defense of a nation. Put it there. It was also to check federal tyranny. And to ensure that there is a constitutional balance by distributing the weapons equally among men. It was also to preserve the internal and external security of the Republic. But now the purpose of the Second Amendment it's for self-defense, can be used inside and outside the home. Okay. It is deeply rooted in tradition. And it is an ordered liberty. Do you see the screen, the board? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Now, the Supreme Court is not alone to have caused that shift of the interpretation in the public opinion. In fact, the NRA has been successful in promoting the argument that the Second Amendment gives the right to bear arms for self-defense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The former CEO of the NRA, I'm gonna write his name over there. Wait, his name is Wayne Lapierre. Um, he has used the terrorist attacks of 9/11 as an argument to defend the right to own guns. He wrote a book, just so you know, when Lapierre was the CEO until January of this year of the NRA. And in 2003, he wrote a book called Guns, Freedom, and Terrorism. Mm-hmm. Freedom, freedom, and terrorism. Mm-hmm. Where he will argue that some rights are more important than others, and that the Second Amendment is the first freedom, the one right that all others lean on the most. Uh, freedom. Um, Already we can see in his group. Okay. More. Okay. Already we can see in his arguments that freedom, what is freedom here? Yeah, freedom, which is the ethos of the right, is associated with the right to be armed. And it is something that is deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. In the same book, talking about history, he asserted that the founders and an army of scholars dating from the Republic of Plato and Rome to modern day America agreed. J'ai oublié de la mettre. Okay, let me say it again. So the founders and an army of scholars Those founders, they date from the Republic of Plato, Rome, and the modern day America. They all agree self-defense works. Criminal fear armed citizens, and so do terrorists. And as I mentioned before, this has been an argument put forward since actually even before, like since the 1960s. And this argument has been adopted by the Republicans and the right-wing mainstream in general. Mm-hmm. So much that the NRA has chosen the Republican Party as the base to promote their ideas. Mm-hmm. And what they do in return is that they boost the political campaign of the Republicans. And they give them privileged seats as much as they can speak in favor of gun rights. So I'm going to give you some example of what the Republicans have said regarding gun rights. In 2014, you remember Elliot Rodger, the incel? Mm-hmm. So he went on killing people in California, 6 people, I think. And you have one guns rights activist. His name is Robert Levi. And he says, and this is part of a quote 23, he says, "Your dead kids don't trump my constitutional rights." In 2015, there is the Oregon campus mass shooting. And you have the Republican Ben Carson, who defended also gun rights. And he says, this is quote number 24, "I never saw a body with bullet holes that was more devastating than taking the right to arm ourselves away." And he also suggested, I'm just continuing reading, that the victims should have had the courage to attack their assailant, and he accused President Obama of politicizing the tragedy by embracing the family of the dead. And the last paragraph, it said, "But ultimately, Mr. Carson," this is from the New York Times, by the way, "but ultimately, Mr. Carson argued, the Second Amendment remains the most effective means of keeping people safe and free. Quoting Daniel Webster, he said, America would never suffer tyranny because the people are armed. In 2016, we have the Supreme Court nominee. No, we have Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. Mm-hmm. That he mentioned that Republicans will never nominate a Supreme Court justice opposed to the NRA. He says, and that's quote number 25, I can't imagine that a Republican majority Congress in a lame duck session after the American people have spoken would want to confirm a nominee opposed by the NRA. If we move forward, 2016 also, we have the NRA that devoted over $30 million for the Trump political campaign. And Trump, on the 100th day in office, he speaks at the National Rifle Association Convention. And he says, and it's in quote number 26, freedom is not a gift from the government. Freedom is a gift from God. And because Trump won the election, he promised them that he will back them up, the NRA. And he says, you came through big for me. I am going to come through for you. Now, there is discussions that prove, how much politicized the Second Amendment is. If we read from quote number 29, which is an article from PBS, it says this is political as much as legal. This is about justices who came out of the conservative movement advocating positions that they've advocated for a long time. And what the Second Amendment means is not determined by the Second Amendment, is determined by who wins presidential election and gets to appoint their like-minded justices. These decisions are about the Constitution means are deeply political, always have been, always will be. Quote number 29. So we are in 2024, and we know that it is a year for the presidential elections. And last month, in May 18, 2024, the NRA has endorsed Trump as the political candidate for the 2024 elections. Quote number 32. It says, today the National Rifle Association's Political Victory Fund, NRA-PVF, is honored to announce its full endorsement of President Donald Trump for re-election to a second term as President of the United States. This endorsement is a recognition of President Donald Trump's unwavering support of the Second Amendment and his dedication for protecting the constitutional right of Americans to defend themselves and their families. As an NRA Life member, President Trump has proven his strong personal commitment to the Second Amendment and the rich American tradition of firearm ownership. And Trump has already made a strong statement during the forum. Forum. Oh, okay. And Trump has already made a strong statement during the forum. He said that he would stand strong for your rights and liberties. He said from quote 33, Trump praised the NRA as the backbone of the country, claiming the Second Amendment is under siege under President Joe Biden. Trump vowed in his speech to protect gun owners' rights, saying, we need it for safety because the bad guys aren't giving up their guns. Okay. So the bad guy, good guy arguments, it's often used also by the NRA to defend their positions. To defend their positions. Rain Lapierre said, and I forgot to put this one too, but he said, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. So again, this notion of liberty and freedom is a key element to uphold the constitutional right to possess and carry guns in case of confrontation. And with the recent interpretation of the Second Amendment by the Supreme Court, um, uh, the influence of the NRA has spread, and it is often backed up by the Republican Party. So, from what we've seen, uh, before the holders of the right was a militia, and it came to individual rights. It shifted to individual rights. Then the object of the right was to bear arms, and it has shifted to carry guns. And then the purpose of the right was for the security of the state. And it has shifted to now mean that it is for self-defense. Okay, so we can recognize that these views come from conservative right-wing Christian. Yeah, that come from them. They come from the conservative, the right-wing, the Christians, fundamentalists. I know that I've not spoken about the Christian fundamentalism, but they also believe that it is a God-given right to carry arms. And many, there's also, I want to say, there's also Democrats, that support the Second Amendment. But it is disproportionately advocated by the right wing. Because they argue that removing or imposing more control will infringe on their freedom, because it is something that is deeply rooted in their history. With this being said, we are missing one element to position ourselves on whether or not we should carry guns. If it is a good thing, if it is a bad thing, in simple terms, of course. And that element is self-defense. So we will need to understand how self-defense works. And what role does it play in the culture war? And that I will talk about it tomorrow. So to summarize, we have taken a journey to look at the history of gun rights. And we have seen that there was a shift in the understanding of the purpose of the right. This shift is actually pretty new. It has been politicized also. It has been legitimized by the Supreme Court, so much that today, when we think of the Second Amendment, we believe that it is for self-defense and the right for an individual to carry. Go ahead. But we need to take into account that the people that are the more that are advocating those rights, and I'm going to say it simply, are from the right wing. They are more libertarianism, far right. It's more from the right wing stream. And even the argument that they bring for self-defense is associated, with their freedom. So our question is, we are now left-leaning movement. What is in the impact of self-defense in our understanding of the Sunday law? I mean, what is the impact of self-defense in our understanding now? Right, let's pray. God of heaven, we want to thank you for the opportunity to come together. Where we can safely discuss the issues of the days. So that we know exactly where to position ourselves in different issues, regarding different issues. I pray that we have an open mind, so we can discern what is the trajectory that we should take. I pray that you continue to bless us during that camp meeting. And that you help us, Lord, to come back tomorrow and continue to study. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus and for your glory. Amen.